Yeah, so let's spend a moment and just understand what's happening on the ground in that part of the Congo. And this is the southeastern part from the towns between Lubumbashi and Kolwezi. And when you get down to that part of the Congo, there are massive industrial mining operations on the one hand. And now outside of the Congo, consumer-facing tech and EV companies will have you believe that all of their cobalt supply in their batteries for their gadgets and cars comes only from these industrial mines. Industrial means what it sounds like. Heavy machinery, excavators digging and gouging at the earth. What's happened there is not sustainable at all in terms of industrial activity. Millions of trees clear-cut, massive destruction and contamination of the environment. Now, alongside that, and the reality is, inside of these industrial operations, there are hundreds of thousands of people, including tens of thousands of children, who dig by hand. Now, the quaint term given to them is artisanal mining, and that makes you think that they're walking around baking bread or doing work in pleasing conditions, but nothing could be further from the truth. Artisanal mining means these tens of thousands of children, hundreds of thousands of people, scrounging at the ground with pickaxes, shovels, stretches of rebar, or their bare hands to pull cobalt out of the ground and feed it up the chain. Many of these people are digging inside industrial mines, and outside of the Congo, tech and EV companies will have you believe that that does not happen, but the truth on the ground is very different. They also dig all around the countryside because cobalt is everywhere. There are more reserves of cobalt in that part of the Congo than the rest of the planet combined. So the local population has been displaced by enormous mining operations. You made note that some of these are as big as cities. Well, these mining concessions means the territory a foreign mining company is allowed to exploit. The biggest one in that part of the Congo is the size of London, where I'm sitting right now. So imagine a London-sized swath of countryside that's been completely gouged, destroyed, clear-cut, and contaminated in this scramble to get cobalt out of the ground and up the chain. And imagine the hundreds of thousands of people who used to live in that territory, forcibly displaced, now without home, without a way to live, and all they can do is scramble back into that ground, try to dig some cobalt out of the earth, and feed it up the chain for $1 or $2 a day. By and large, these consumer-facing tech and EV companies look the other way. And these are the big names we're all familiar with: Apple, Tesla, Google, Microsoft, Samsung. I mean, you can go down the list. They all buy some, most, or all of their cobalt from the Congo because there's no other cobalt to buy, quite frankly. They're all aware to some degree, I'm sure, of the conditions on the ground, and by and large, they simply offer PR statements that their supply chains are audited, that they're certified, that they protect and preserve the human rights of every participant in their supply chain, that they have zero tolerance policies on child labor, that mining is done sustainably. So you as a consumer, you as a shareholder, don't worry about it. But the truth that the Congolese people have to share is completely different. They are at the bottom of this supply chain with no alternative but to eke out this base, scrounging, hazardous, miserable existence for $1 or $2 a day, feeding cobalt up the chain to these behemoth tech and EV companies. As your clip mentioned, the mother said there's no other alternative there. These people have been displaced and pushed to a cliff's edge. If they want to eat, they have to put their lives at risk to dig cobalt out of the ground. And it's part of the scramble. You see, there is so much demand, especially being driven by this transition to electric vehicles. There is so much demand for cobalt that mining companies can't get it out of the ground quickly enough. Well, if you have hundreds of thousands of grindingly poor people there digging it out of the ground, it's a penny-wage way of boosting production to try and meet demand. And your listeners and viewers should understand, cobalt is toxic. It's toxic to touch. It's toxic to breathe. So I have seen thousands of women with babies strapped to their backs inhaling toxic cobalt dust day in and day out, 10-year-old children caked in toxic filth, exposing themselves to toxic cobalt, and the ore that these children are digging that has cobalt in it often has traces of radioactive uranium. So the public health catastrophe, on top of the human rights violence, on top of the environmental destruction, is unlike anything we've ever seen in the modern context. And the fact that it is linked to companies worth trillions and that our lives depend on this enormous violence has to be dealt with. You see the riches that are enjoyed at the top of the chain, they're stacked to the sky on top of the narrow, beleaguered shoulders of the children of the Congo. So start with a family unit. Men and teenage boys with some strength, they might be digging tunnels in a neighborhood like Kasulo that you just mentioned, which is in Kolwezi, ground zero for cobalt mining. They dig shafts down into the ground up to 100 feet deep to try to find slightly higher grades of cobalt ore. Think of it like purity, so that instead of earning $1 or $2 or $3, maybe they'll earn 4 or 5 or 6. Well, they're crouched in darkness. They don't have room to sit up as they work for 18 hours at a time underground. And those tunnels often collapse, burying alive everyone inside. On the ground, you'll have younger children and maybe mothers digging in pits and trenches that could be a few meters deep. They will gather sacks of dirt and stone and fill them up and take them over to putrid rinsing pools, where young children, little boys and girls, will use a sieve to try to separate dirt and stone from cobalt-bearing ore. They go through this process throughout an entire day to fill one sack, for which the family might get $2 or $3 or $4 from the buyers, the Chinese buyers, who then sell it to formal industrial mining companies. So at the bottom end, children could be earning 50 cents to $1 for rinsing and sieving and sorting. And at the best, on the best day, tunnel digging males and teenage boys might earn $5 or $6 or $7, but putting their lives at risk for a potentially horrid